And the share is on. Okay, so Agile Team, starting your journey. So what is that all about? So as we've been coaching, we have found a lot of times people are doing Agile, they think they're doing Agile, they put different types of teams together, and a lot of times what they found is they don't really know how they got started. So they're just, working and doing stuff with this very Agile. We do like that. But to give you guys some deep questions to ask and things you can do to help you get started on your journey as you come together. So this is a way to form. This model, this team development model, is based on Bruce Tuckman. So if you ever heard of Bruce Tuckman, he developed this model in 1965. So before most of us were born, I won't say all of us, but before most of us were born, he developed this, and it has taken a strong foothold and has become even more interesting since Agile was founded in 2001 as an approach. So we're based on that. And we have a quote from a player from Los Angeles Sparks, Shanae Agumike. So she's one of the players on the basketball team there, and I really like this quote. "True teams are made when you put aside individual wants for collective good." And this is a mindset change. So while it's a sports player who's bringing this up, and a lot of us who have played sports or participated in sports or coached sports, we kind of know that the team is better than the individuals. So we want to put them together. But when we do the workplace, we need to do the same. Individuals can only do so far. Heroes can only do so much. So we need to form that team. So if we work together and create that collective good, we can go a lot farther. Our team development model follows the Bruce Tuckman model, and it is based on the 4 stages. So it's based on forming, and that's what we're going to talk about today, forming an Agile team. This is where the team gets together, they learn their opportunities and challenges. From there, they get into a storming, which is very disruptive, chaotic, conflict-oriented stage. So they actually do a little bit less performing when they hit that storming phase. They're doing less work because they're really starting to open up and start to be more of themselves instead of trying to always, present a good face. So the storming phase is kind of interesting. And then the norming phase, they really start to soar a little bit. So the norming phase is where the team is starting to find their pace, their cadence, they're challenging each other, they're always trying to find ways to improve. And then ultimately, teams look to get to become a high-performing team. And those high-performing teams are always challenged to stay there. They tend to bounce between high-performing and norming, and they go back and forth. High-performing teams, something's going to disrupt them, and if they're not constantly challenging themselves, they will slip back down. That is a lot of why Agile coaches and Scrum Masters exist and need to continue to exist even when we reach those high-performing teams. So today we'll talk about forming. So let's look at that particular phase in the team development model. So forming phase is really about coming together, embarking on that new journey. The team is sorting itself out, right? Have uncertainty, so we're looking through that all the time, right? And team members must relinquish their individual comfort. Okay, so that's where they have to let that go. All right, let's take a look at the 11 stages for forming that team. So this is for the team to embark on that journey. So one thing we want to do is we want to talk about the stakeholders, finding who those are. A vision statement. Every team needs to have some vision. What's the vision for the team? We're not necessarily talking the vision for the company or the product. What's the vision for the team? Talk about the team itself. Who are the team? What's it made of? What's the mission of the team? Vision being forward thinking, and mission, which is more tactical. Always need to come up with a team name, help create that identity. A working agreement. How do we work together? Training. What might we need in order to become that team, or what skills do we need to obtain? What's our environment, our physical environment, our virtual environment? How do we know we're ready? What's our definition of ready when we're looking at our items or our tasks? And how do we know we're done with things? And then ultimately, we're building a product backlog in order for us to deliver against. So these are the 11 stages that help form an Agile team. Okay. And with that, we're going to let Hutch take you through the first set of stages here. So Hutch, I'm going to pass it off to you to go through the first one.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Sherman. Yeah, just kicking off the 11 steps are kind of our initial step is coming up with or identifying the stakeholders. Sometimes we've experienced where teams are operating, but they really don't have an identified stakeholder. But that's critical for that team to really know what their direction, what the expectation is for their productivity. So it's important to identify the stakeholders. And these would be resources, teams, participants who have a vested interest or concern in the work that the new team will be doing. All right, so identifying the stakeholders. Who are those resources? Who is important? Who's interested in? Who has an impact to this team so that they can be successful? Very key step here is identifying the stakeholders. Next, Sherman. Yeah, Sherman mentioned in the chat, if you have questions, feel free to ask them. You can ask them in the chat. This is informal. We're not necessarily making this a one-way presentation, so feel free to ask questions as we go through this. Second step, okay, if we have stakeholders, if we want to form a team, so what is this team's purpose? What is this team's goal or an objective? All right, it's important to know for the team so they know if they're going to be aligned with what their expectations are from the stakeholders. So the vision statement is what we're suggesting be created, identifying what difference the team will actually be established, a statement that identifies what that team is going to achieve and accomplish, not necessarily in the short term, but in the mid to long term. What is the long-term vision, the long-term goal for the team? And a lot of times the vision statement itself is really the result of a collaboration between the team and the stakeholders. Sometimes we've even experienced where the stakeholders will create the vision and then have the team formed around that. But regardless, it's important that the team have a vision statement. All right, we have a question in the chat. Oh no, that's just Sherman's your comment. Okay, all right. Next step. So we talk about stakeholders, we talk about vision statement. Next step, step number 3. All right, so if we're going to form a team, right? Who is the team, right? The team itself. What skills are needed for the team? There's really three components of this particular step. What are the skills needed for the team? Who are the members of the team that have those skills? And then for each member, what are their roles? Right, so definitely important for the forming of a team is knowing who's going to be on the team, what their skills needed, and what are the roles. But then also you want to take in consideration the size of the team, right? I mean, you don't want to get it to a team is too large. You know, from a Scrum perspective, Scrum framework, we look at, you know, 5 plus 7 plus or minus 2 in that neighborhood. So size is important. And if it requires a large team, the teams may be broken up into 2. So again, as we mentioned here, the team is built for self-organizing success. All right, next, Sherman, number 4, step number 4. So we talk about having a vision statement, but now we also want the team, we would like for the team to come up with a mission statement. And this itself doesn't necessarily need collaboration with the stakeholders. This is the team coming up with a mission statement, and we're primarily targeting kind of what their short-term goal is going to be. This could be a statement of 1 or 2 sentences, a couple of paragraphs, but identifying what the team is going to achieve. What product are they going to provide? What service are they going to perform? How is success going to be achieved? Right? So the mission statement is literally meant to kind of identify what we are calling the journey that this team is going to follow. Right? So just to summarize, up to now, we talk about identifying stakeholders, establishing a vision statement, identifying the team, who's going to be on the team, and then developing a mission statement. So I don't see any questions in the chat. So Sherman, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. We do have a couple of questions in the chat.
Oh, we do?
I'll read them out. Yeah, I think because we can't send it publicly, some of them are coming to me.
Just coming to you. Oh, okay.
Let's see. So I'll read the question out. So what does this mean? How will the team be guided? How will you guide the team? You want to take that, Hutch?
Yeah, that would be one of the, and we establish the team, right? For example, if it's going to be a Scrum team, then of course you've got the 3 roles associated with it being a Scrum team. But the good thing about this team development model, it doesn't necessarily have to follow Scrum or Agile. It can be a team development model even for a waterfall team. And that way you can have, you know, a project manager or a project leader being that particular resource who's going to kind of provide the guidance and oversight. But one of the things that we did mention was establishing the stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? So the stakeholders themselves, you know, provide the sort of the scope, direction of for the particular team. And if it is a Scrum team, then you have your product owners interacting with the stakeholders, and then the product owners guiding the team as far as establishing the work that needs to be done. So the guiding of the team should be identified as part of identifying the team and the roles of the team members.
Yeah, and adding on to that a lot with the stakeholders, by identifying your stakeholders, you're getting them involved, you're getting their buy-in, and that way you don't have this team that's formed and you're trying to fight the organization all the time. I'm sure many of us have seen sometimes in our past where we've had a team, we like our team, but we find out that the organization doesn't support us. It's frustrating. We're always fighting or swimming upstream. So getting your stakeholders involved, you're making them visibly aware of what's going on. You're sharing with them. They're helping fulfill your vision and your mission too. So that's important there. Another question here, Hutch, on the mission statement. Does the mission statement usually align with the organization mission statement, and who would be responsible for creating it?
Well, for the team, for the mission statement for the team itself would have responsibility for coming up with their mission statement. Now, as far as getting approval, that can be through the stakeholders or through management or leadership of the organization to make sure there is alignment. But the team itself has that initial responsibility for coming up with their mission statement.
Thank you, Hutch. Those are the questions I received so far. All right, I'm going to continue on with the next set of steps as we move on to step 5. This is where your team needs to really be creative. You need to come up with an identity, a team name. It seems so simple and so trite, but there's so many times I coach teams and they call themselves Agile Team 1, Agile Team 2, you know, the Scrum Team 3. It's like, be creative, come up with a great name. Who are you? Who do you want to be? You know, have fun with that, celebrate that. This summer I had a very fun opportunity to host a team of interns in my company, something we do every year. But this year we did it a little different because we had a virtual internship team and they just finished off last week. They're all going back to university. Already missed them. But one of the first things they did was go through this forming a team. We had 5 interns and they had to figure it out. So they came up with a team name. And when they got to know each other, They found out that a few of them really enjoyed space. Some of them really found out that they really liked dinosaurs. They ended up calling themselves the Space Dinos. So all summer long, they're referred to as, you know, the Space Dinos team. And they had so much fun with that. They actually created a logo, branded the Space Dinos, and they actually made t-shirts that they sent Hutch and I as a thank you gift for having them as interns for the summer. And they just had so much fun, just a simple thing like a team name. So be creative, find your DNA, make that happen. Some of the teams Hutch and I are coaching right now, after coaching them for about a year, they finally have created team names a few months ago. And that has been a big win. They're having fun with that. They have unique virtual backgrounds. One of them is the Minions, Agile Minions. So they have a background of all the Minions from the movie. So some of them, when they get on video, like you see behind me, they actually have a picture of Minions behind them. So do some fun stuff. Be creative with that. So moving to step 6, this is your working agreement. So every team needs to have a working agreement. Every set of people should have some type of agreement. If you have roommates, you know, if you rent an apartment, with your roommates, you should have a roommate agreement. What are some of the things that you make sure you all agree you want to do? What are the practices you want? So you want to get those in there. What happens when you don't follow those? So if we say we're all going to be on video when we have team time for 2 hours every day, and if some of the people aren't on video for that, you can point back to the working agreement and say, hey, we're not able to meet our working agreement. We all want to be on video to see our face, our expressions, our hands, our body language, you know, to know people are physically present and mentally present. And if that's not working, you can point back to the working agreement and say, hey, let's update our working agreement. It's so much more friendlier than being able to call somebody out and say, hey, Hutch, you're never on video. This is very frustrating. You know, this way you can say, hey, it doesn't look like we're able to meet the working agreement. Let's do something different. Maybe it turns out those 2 hours are a really bad time of day. Maybe that's the time of day when Hutch has, you know, children in his background and he doesn't want to share his family on video. I don't know, whatever it is. Maybe that's a poor time of day. But that's what opens that discussion. So what's in the working agreement? When do we have our events? When do we have our meetings? Do we start on time? Do we end on time? How do we interrupt each other? Do we raise a hand, right? If there's an elephant in the room, something we really need to address, do we physically hold up an elephant? Not a real elephant, a stuffed elephant. If you can physically hold up a real elephant, you have a superpower. So good for you. Okay, so working agreement. Make sure the team creates those. And most important, revisit them often. The team I had a chance to coach, they revisited them every week. They would set together, they would set aside about 30 minutes every week to say, our working agreement, does this need updating? Do we need to change it? If they didn't, they might only be together for 5 or 10 minutes, but they set a time aside, or they set time aside in order to look at that. All right, moving on to step 7, training. So as we formed the team, we figured out the team members, we learned our skills. What skills do we have? What skills don't we have? What do we know? What don't we know? How do we need to learn from each other? How do we need to learn from somebody outside? What training might we need? Do we need an introduction to Agile training? Do we need Scrum training? Do we need technical training? Do we need Kanban training? Do we need to learn from each other? Maybe it's just a lunch and learn workshop. Maybe somebody has a lot of skills and the rest of the team are new to that skill. Maybe that one person does a knowledge share training. So this is where you want to explore that as you form a team. What do we think we need to learn? And like in our working agreement, we need to revisit this. As we get trained on new things, we're going to learn new things that we didn't even know that we need to be trained on. So we want to constantly look at that. Where else can we get training? So we want to look at that. How can we grow? How can we accelerate? This is our forming stage. But if we want to go from forming, storming, norming to performing, we're going to need to keep growing and keep training. As we move into step 8, we really want to look at what environment are we in? So if we're in a physical environment, what does that look like? Do we have a space set aside where we can have our team board, where we can have our daily scrum or daily stand-up? right? Is there that type of space? Are we physically able to do that? Is it visible for everybody? Do we have a dedicated meeting room, right? If we're working in, cubicle walls, or if we have plexiglass these days, we want to talk about that environment. How are we going to interrupt each other if we're trying to really respect that plexiglass in COVID-19? Cubicles are making a comeback, I'm sad to say, but they're making a comeback thanks to COVID-19. But we want to still say, how do we interrupt somebody? So what's the physical environment like? And if we're virtual, what's our virtual? What tools are we going to use? We want to agree. Are we going to use Slack? We're going to use Zoom. We're going to use Microsoft Teams. All right, we're going to use Google Meet. All right, what else are we going to do? Let's figure that out. We're virtual, we're on site. What equipment do we need? Does everybody have cameras? Does everybody have cameras that are capable of showing a virtual background? Do we need to upgrade that? We want to talk about that. What's our collective workspace? Are we going to be using a Microsoft Teams space? Are we going to be using a Slack space? Are we going to use SharePoint? Are we going to use Confluence? Are we going to have something unique and custom? Right? Whatever it is, we want to talk about that workspace so we can collaborate effectively and efficiently. So we need to discuss our environment. And once again, we revisit that. We look at that over again and say, how can we always make that simple? Always follow the keep it simple model, the KISS model, right? And say, hey, are there things in our environment we don't need? Let's get rid of those too. Don't always keep growing and adding, but find ways to reduce, and make your environment simple. Okay, Hutch, we're going to go back to you for going to step 9.
All righty. Sounds good. So as we're moving through these steps now, informing, we're getting
Hutch, I'm going to interrupt you a little bit. I noticed there's a few questions that I didn't address, so I'm going to take a look at those first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So let's see. So somebody stated kind of as a statement, their working agreement is really important. They still have it. They still use it. So awesome. Big celebration. I'm glad that's helping you out and you find that an awesome artifact. Right. Somebody asked, how do you do a working agreement when you have contractors who are virtual in different time zones? They've never met, team is formed, customer integration. So that's pretty neat. So how do you handle that? That's what's really awesome, because when you know people really well, working agreements tend to not happen. When you don't know people well, it's almost easier to do a working agreement, because we can say, hey, what do we want to do? We're in different time zones. Do we want to create that collaboration time? Do we want to create core working time? These are two of my favorite terms. You can have core working hours. I'm currently in the Pacific time zone, right? And maybe myself, those in the Pacific are working with people in Europe. We might make an agreement that, hey, everybody needs to work, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific. Those 2 hours a day, the entire team is actually working. Some people start earlier, some people start later, but maybe those are core hours that we know everybody is live and online. And then we might say during that time is also our collaboration time. We're all on video, we see each other, we're working, we can talk. I can reach out to any of you and just, say, hey, Hutch, I got a question. I just did this. I want to show you what I'm doing. So you might have those core hours and collaboration hours. If you have different teams in different time zones, they might create their own working agreement for that area. And they might say, how do we have our working agreement cross with those in a different geography? So you could have a geographic based working agreement, and then you can have a collaborative working agreement. So there's unique things you can do there. You always have challenges when you're working with an area that is truly, for us in the Pacific time zone, those that are in India, has always been challenging through my career because they're usually 12 and a half or 13 and a half hours ahead. So that's always a challenge. But you can find that time where both of you can give a few hours one way or the other, and you can get those 2 hours of overlap. And that has worked really well. Sometimes if you really get that working well, you can get an hour or two of overlap on each end of your day, which is really impressive with India. So if you work that and you put that in agreement, you might meet with them 1 hour at the beginning of your day and 1 hour at the end of your day, which is opposite for those that are in India. They catch it at the end of their day and the beginning of their day, but it allows those touch points, those collaboration, less handoff, more working together. So great questions. Okay. All right. All right, Hutch. Let's go back to you for
Okay.
step 9 now.
All right, good. So as we mentioned, there are 11 steps associated with forming an Agile team. We've gone through 8. So now we're getting closer to having the team form. The step number 9 is, and probably most of you Agile practitioners are familiar with definition of ready. But we wanted to have this included in the forming process because it's important as a team gets ready to start working and developing stories and working on stories, that they come up with an understanding of what is the definition of ready. When is a story now ready to be worked by the development team? As we mentioned here, the definition of ready is the product or service features, is it small? Can it be built in a short duration? Can feedback actually be obtained as part of the steps needed to be, again, worked by the development team? And is there value? Probably a number of you who've worked with development teams are familiar with the INVEST acronym that's sometimes used as a criteria for identifying the definition of ready. The INVEST is an acronym where I is independent, that the user story that's written is not dependent on any other user story, and that that particular story is negotiable between the product owner and the development team. V stands for value. Is this story of value? Does it add value to the business? E is estimable. Can the user story be estimated? Then the letter S stands for small, as we mentioned here. And then finally, T, can that story, can it be tested? Can the work that the development team is going to be doing, can it be tested? And that development team can be both either an IT team or a non-IT team. A couple of the clients we work with are actually teams that are not IT. And they're identifying how the work that they're going to be doing, whether it's process improvement or identifying training activities, how can those stories be tested? But this is to be identified as part of the definition ready. And as Sherman mentioned before, the team should be revisiting this to make sure that the definition ready is aligned with being able to have that user story being ready now to be pulled by the development team. So definition of ready, preparing the journey. That's a very important step. Okay, step number 9. Next, Sharon. Is there a question? One question?
You're good. Yep, you're good. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
One question that did come up earlier was, where can we find examples like the working agreement, the teaming agreement?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if you're looking for examples later, feel free to email me directly, Sherman@scrumadventures.com. You're always welcome to do that,
Right.
or Hutch@scrumadventures.com. So you can reach out to us. I also have a 15-minute free coaching sessions if you guys ever want that. I have that on Calendly. If you're familiar with that, calendly.com/Scrum Adventures. So you're always welcome to book 15-minute free appointments with me. And I'll make sure I have them set up for the rest of the month. Usually I do about a month at a time of spots that I have open. So you're always welcome to get, free 10, 15 minutes if you have coaching or questions too.
And also, Sherman, we're going to make this deck available too, right?
Yep.
For anyone who's interested.
They will have that immediately after, as we move to our activity when we're done going through the presentation.
Okay, great. All right, speaking of the presentation, step number 10, if we looked at step 9 being definition of ready, which is again, preparing for the journey, preparing for the work, how do we know that the work is done? So of course, now we come up with defining what is done. What does done mean to the team? The team works together and identify When do they know that the work is done? When that product or service is completed? When the product can be shipped? Does it need to be approved? Can it be released? What are the steps needed? And this can vary between an IT team, which goes to, of course, the developing the code and doing unit testing, QA testing, and what have you in preparation for being shown or demoed. But for a non-IT team, the definition of done can vary based on what the department or organization or firm, the work that's being done. So it's critical, though, that the teams come together, members of the team come together and identify what is their definition of done. When do they think that particular work can be moved to production? Can it be shipped? All right, step number 10. Any questions? All right, last but not least, step number 11. Oh, the product backlog, the infamous product backlog. Says fulfilling the mission statement, but this backlog is where the work that's going to be done, where is it described, where is it identified, what is going to be built, what feature is going to be built, what product, what service is going to be performed, what process is going to be improved. The product backlog is what is, like I said, the repository from what's to be built. Is what's identified, is it outcome versus output based? How do we know that that work can be accepted, that it's ready for production? What work should be done now versus work that can be done later? The prioritization of the work, ordering the work. What work has more value than another story or piece of work? These things are supported within the product backlog. The items that are included in the backlog can be items just identified for consideration, not necessarily to be worked right away, but could be identified for a feature or a piece of work that can be done at some point in the future. So the product backlog is important. Once this product backlog starts to be developed, then the team is starting to have work identified for it, work that can be performed, moving into the next stage, which is the storming stage. So product backlog, very critical as far as getting the team ready to actually be productive. Any questions?
So far, no other written questions.
Okay, so those are the 11 steps. This is the 11 steps that Sherman and I, based on our experiences, come up with. Would be interested to know if you have any additional steps that you might think would be included in the forming phase. Again, in this case, the steps that we've identified are the steps needed for a team to be productive as far as doing the product development and performing services activities. So we think we've covered those critical steps needed for a team to be productive, but we'd be interested if there's some, based on your experiences, if you think there's some other steps that would be included in the forming phase.
Hutch, we got two questions. I'll ask them. You want to take them? The first one.
Okay,
Is
go
an
for
Agile
it.
team the same as a Scrum team? You want to take that one?
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, it's a good question. Naturally, that goes to the question of the difference between Agile and Scrum, all right? Scrum itself is what is referred to as a framework and is one of a number of frameworks within the Agile, let's say an Agile umbrella. Agile is a mindset, a culture, a way of working. And as far as the different approaches to achieving agility can be done by performing Scrum, Kanban, or Lean. So you could have teams working and following different frameworks with the intent of becoming Agile. So just make sure there's a difference there between Agile and Scrum. Scrum is a framework, Agile is a mindset, a culture, a way of working that's based on the Agile Manifesto, which identifies 4 values and 12 principles.
All right, next question. I'll be happy to take this one, but it's where do we capture the time frame? So one of my pet peeves is when teams create what they call sprint zero. So I'll just call that as a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah,
so in general, don't do it. This is just my coaching advice. You want to be able to build something productive each and every period of time, whether you're using sprints and Scrum or you're following the flow of Kanban. You want to be able to produce. So you are forming while you are producing. You'll just find in the beginning, you're just going to produce very little. That's fine. Take one item in, the product backlog that we have as the 11th step. You might just tell one thing in that you can produce. You know, maybe if your team is truly a software development team and you're building, you know, adding onto a website, maybe the only thing you produce is you just create one page that has specifications of your product. Maybe that's the only thing you do in the first period of time. So you're doing these forming activities while you're building that one item.
Yeah.
Right. And you'll continue with those as you hit the next period of time, whether it's a sprint or it's another flow item in Kanban. You just keep doing that. So, you know, stay away from the waterfall trap, which is we've got to do all these things.
Right.
This is a guideline. Forming an Agile team here, this is a guideline to help you and help your teams find their own way. Not meant to be prescribed, not something we have to do and say, hey, we got to do this for the first week before we can do anything.
Right.
The cost of doing that, if you have a 7-person team, each person costs $100 an hour, right? That's, you know, $700 an hour, that's $5,600 a day, right? So that's, you know, $30,000 a week just to form a team. Do you want to invest $30,000 to form a team without producing something? Probably not. So let's produce something and form while we go. Okay. A couple more questions here. I'll read them out. Let's see. Kathy, I'm going to kind of call you out because if you don't mind speaking, I'll let you kind of speak to your question. What if we have a targeted end date and we're used to waterfall and schedules? You want to expand on that a little bit, and maybe Hutch and I can help or with that?
I just want to know, like, suppose we need to have like a pretty functional demo or even something that needs to be delivered. Where, I mean, does it fit in one of these, does it fit in one of these items? That's what I'm saying. Like, we know that we need to achieve something, you know, to, maybe it's demo internal, maybe it's actually deliver something to a customer. That's what I meant of, like, we have a deliverable, where does it fit in one of these?
Cool. No, good question. So yeah, your question is really a little bit more about the product, which is kind of where we get into the step 11, the product backlog. What's in that backlog?
Okay.
And then even if you go to step 10, how do we know we were actually done with that item? That's important because we as a team, as we formed, we have to all agree what that done is.
Okay.
What is that done? And that'll help us produce whether we have a hard deliverable based on a date, but it can also let us play with the depth and the breadth of those items, which is something that we embrace with agility.
So if we have a target date in mind, we might have to kind of throw some things out or trim things or whatever or reprioritize in order to reach that target. And we're going to be doing that iteratively.
Right. You want to constantly learn. And this way you can, you know, you can ask your team, hey team, how can we grow from the forming to the storming, norming, performing as a team so we can produce more product more accurately, less rework, right? More visibility, more stakeholder involvement. So we're going to want to constantly ask that so we can get there. No, that's great. Okay, next question I have here. Is it important to have people with various skill sets on the team, or only the people with same skills and ideology are desired on the team? Hutch, you want to take that one? Did you catch that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the and we didn't talk about this as part of the team, but when we talk about the skills associated with the team, our goal is to have a cross-functional, what we call a cross-functional team, a team that's made up of the necessary skills in order to produce product, to produce the feature. So that team is self-organizing, cross-functional, work amongst themselves, collaborate amongst themselves to be able to make commitments as to producing a product or feature, and then being able to meet that commitment without having to actually go outside the team in most instances to get the work done. So it's not a team that's made up of one skill. That's another type of team. But the team we're talking about as far as the development team, if you will, is a cross-functional team, self-organizing, that team itself can produce the feature and the product as defined by the product owner and or stakeholders. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Hutch. All right, Hutch, I'm going to do one more question here, then we're going to break into our teams here where you guys are going to have a fun activity to go a little bit and explore with and make some new friends. I always like making new friends, virtual or not. We are friends. All right, next question. How would you measure the capacity of your sprint? You want to take that, Hutch? You and I talk about capacity a lot, so go for it.
Yeah, capacity of the sprint would, again, when we look at the team and the makeup of the team, before we start or kick off a sprint, to identify the capacities based on identifying for each of the team members how much available time they will be able to work for that sprint. Normally that would be computed as far as hours, if you will. So it's different from velocity, but the capacity is just based on the team availability for a particular sprint. If you got a 2-week sprint and an FTE or a member of the team can work full time, then basically you have 80 hours that team member has capacity for working during the sprint. But it is important to identify the capacity for the team in the start of the sprint. So that in itself can lend to how much work that the team can commit to for a given sprint.
And I'll add to that a little bit because that's the capacity of the team. There's the velocity, which is the product you get, measuring your product that you can produce. And Hutch and I have built an agility metrics program. We want to make sure teams are measuring their agility, not their velocity. Velocity is just a measure of output. We want to make sure we measure our outcome, and we want to build those high-performing teams. So we have another program, which we'll leave for another Scrum and Wine, about agility metrics, or feel free to reach out to Hutch and I to learn more about that program. But that's something our teams use now, measure their own agility to find out how they can move towards becoming a high-performing team. So, and that way we get our stakeholders to stay away from measuring, quantifiable things that get gained, right? Velocity is really easy to gain. You can just change numbers, make smaller items, whatever you do, it's really easy to gain velocity. So we want to measure agility. All right, with that, I'm going to end the presentation. So thank you to my partner here, Hutch, and we're going to go into our team breakout. So I'm going to stop the recording. Start with that right now. Okay, the recording stopped.